Okay, so today I've got Judith Garbutt on the other end of the line. Thank you, Judith, for joining me today.
Thank you.
This, I can imagine, is going to be fascinating, and it's extremely selfish of me, given that your role as an educational psychologist at this moment in time, current circumstances, you are possibly one of the most sought after people I could think of. So to have known you for such a long time now and have the pleasure of great conversations in the past with you about all things child psychology related, with this pandemic and the underlying stress of homeschooling, amongst other things, who better to speak to? So thank you for sparing some of your valuable time to chat through things. How have you been?
Not too bad, thank you. It's very busy, as you would expect.
Yeah. And how's this whole situation affected your day-to-day work? Where would you normally be practicing day-to-day, and how have you been coping with this?
Well, normally we would be in and out of schools, probably in for at least half a day, sometimes an entire day, working with individual children, doing what I call consultations with parents, teachers, doing some direct assessment work with children. So maybe sitting down with them and learning out, how they approach a task, how they stumble across a task, looking at how they are functioning emotionally, meeting with parents and pulling it all together through what's called consultation. So it's a problem-solving exercise. So right now, because we can't get into schools, we can't actually do that side of the work. So I suppose the key thing for us is that we've moved to phone consultations. Not all schools can do video conferencing. Not all parents have video conferencing tools. So we're kind of feeling our way a little bit in this brave new world, whilst still trying to do assessments of children, for example, for statutory assessments, which we still legally have to do, and finding out how we can move things on for children and young people in the 0 to 25 range.
So this is, as you say, they're in and out of school. So working for your local authority in this role as an educational psychologist, and presumably even in the absence of something like this, where you can go into schools, you're, as you said there, you're assessing children's behaviour, you're developing presumably pathways for the teachers and the parents to get the best learning for these children. So what have you witnessed already? That, we are certainly in the UK, we've just finished 2 weeks, coming to the end of 2 weeks of holidays. So we've only had the one solid week of homeschooling as such with the lockdown, but recently announced we've got another 3 weeks. So what have you noticed already with your current clients, and particularly the parents? What sort of emotions are they going through?
I would imagine that there's a lot of fear going on for parents, a lot of anxiety about what's going to happen, what's going to come in the future. How is my child going to manage going back into the school environment? Are they going to have lost learning between now and whenever we go back in? Are they seeing higher levels of maybe anxiety or stress or regression in types of behaviour that they've not seen before? And will that go when things go back to normal? So I would imagine a lot of it is fear and anxiety driven. Fear of the unknown is quite massive for all of us, really, isn't it?
Absolutely. So far, everyone that I've spoken to, coming from different professionalisms, has all kind of targeted it back to that underlying emotion, as the uncertainty of everything. And do you have particular tools, advice that you could give, not just your current clients, obviously, that you're doing day to day, but for all of us, again, very selfishly asking this, but if we're going into this uncharted territory of trying to homeschool our children, Is there certain things, certain tools we could consider as parents becoming teachers?
There are a lot of tools out there on the internet that have been developed by schools. The BBC from tomorrow are producing a range of lessons that are available for children and young people to access. For me, it might sound a little bit contentious. I would be cautious about trying to force, in inverted commas, learning onto children and young people whilst they're in an anxious mood, because they're not going to be ready for certain aspects of learning. As a parent, previously I was a teacher before being a psychologist, so you would imagine I would be able to teach my children. It's actually harder to teach your own children than it is to teach other children. And from personal experience, trying to teach my kids, for example, about neutrons and electrons, you can sometimes feel your own stress levels get higher. So as a dysregulated adult, I can dysregulate my children. So it's about us as adults recognizing as well that, yes, schools want us to teach this, but am I ready for that? And is my child ready for that? And if we're not ready for it, then we are not regulated, so you can't access your learning brain.
I think what you've said there is really, really reassuring, given your qualifications, you say. So an educational psychologist now, previously a teacher, prior to that, first and foremost, a parent. And you are admitting yourself that teaching your own children is a very, very difficult thing. So I think we could all probably take a big sigh of relief knowing that someone with your skill set would struggle with it. I actually have an email from my children's head teacher, just a supportive email that went out to all parents, and it said something very similar. You know, she actually admitted that her first day of homeschooling her children had been extremely stressful. So that first point you made, you know, just acknowledging that the anxiety, the emotion is going to be there, and perhaps because you'd hope our children are more comfortable with us as individuals, you know, they're more happier to, I guess, express their emotions in front of us more so than they would their teachers. That in itself can create a barrier to their learning. So is that what you're saying there, that if we're aware of there being some really underlying emotion from the child, whether it's fear, whether it's anxiety, that actually trying to force learning them to take on the subject that you're teaching is actually counterproductive?
I would say so, yeah, because you can end up in a cycle of negativity. So you've got the work, you know, you've got to do, I don't know, let's say your times tables, and you know how you were taught them, and your kids know how they've been taught them. So if you're trying to teach them in a different way and your kids get upset about that, then they're not thinking. And then you're going to get irritated with your kids because they're not listening, so you're going to get irritated. So then you've got two dysregulated people, and your thinking brain can't then actually access the learning that needs to be done.
Okay.
So sometimes it's better to take a step back and just think to yourself, right, I'm not doing it right now. In the same way as when you've got a child, for example, who's having a bit of a temper tantrum, and you're trying to say to them, why did you do that? Just calm down. The child can't hear that information at that particular point. So it's better to step back, because the cortisol and the adrenaline will be floating around for about 90 minutes. So every time there is a trigger, that's then re-released, and you just remain in stress mode for that increased period of time. So step back and just allow yourself to regulate and the child to regulate.
Okay.
And the other reality, Rob, is that in homeschooling, in the pandemic, we're not going to be sat at our desks from 9 o'clock in the morning until 4 o'clock at night doing work. You know, they may only be getting 2 hours worth of learning. And that 2 hours of learning would probably be better than trying to sit from 9 o'clock till 3:30, because that's what school is. And again, that might be quite contentious, but that's the reality.
Yeah, that's a very valid point, and again, very reassuring. I think, so basically to not feel guilty if you're not ticking the 9 till 3 box and saying, right, we've done this subject, or structuring it in such a way so that you're asking that much more of your children in an environment where they're so used to just down-regulating, relaxing when they perhaps come home from school. Suddenly they're expected to churn out some good solid study. You mentioned there about you mentioned stress hormones floating around, and how even trying to become a teacher as a parent could create so much frustration between the two of you that you trigger the fight or flight mechanism, and you'll see this in the frustration. So we've already experienced this with our kids, and as you said earlier, that essentially then blocks the learning. So it'd be better to just put it to one side, break away from it, change it, and perhaps come back to it.
Back to it when you're all settled. Yeah. And you could maybe even reflect on, you know, I don't think we were quite ready to do that particular task. What do you think, to your child? And then they would possibly say, no, I wasn't. And then you can problem solve. What was it that led us to actually find that's quite so hard? And then that's where you get the clues about how kids learn as well.
Okay, and how does that, so can you explain that to me, the side with, you know, the emotion, so your emotional brain, your thinking brain, how does that fit in?
Can you see my hand?
Yep.
Yeah,
yep.
Right. So imagine this is your brainstem. This bit here is your emotional brain. And this bit here is your thinking brain.
Okay, yep.
So right now, thinking brain is in charge. Okay? Your thinking brain and your emotional brain can't work together. So we take in information through our senses, so through our ears, our eyes, our mouth, all of those things. If, for example, I'll use me, physics is not my forte in any way, shape, form or fashion. Okay, so anything physics related, electrical, anything like that, my thinking brain flips immediately. And I can feel my stomach churning, and I can feel the tears starting to come up, because this part of my brain is now in charge. Okay, so when that's in charge, as much as I can actually say to myself, right, it's going to be okay, I'm going to do this, this is saying, no, physics is a threat. So times tables is a threat, reading is a threat, speaking out loud is a threat. Once that thinking brain has been flipped, this is in charge. So we've got to learn how to put the lid back down. All right. So what we try to do as psychologists is to help parents, children and staff understand that some of the behaviours that they are using to communicate could actually be the clues that the lid is starting to flip. So the irritability, the fractiousness, the I'm not doing it, I'm stamping off, are all clues that actually your thinking brain is starting to flip and the emotional brain is in charge.
So it's becoming aware of the signals, the indicators in your own children. That's what's occurring when you're not just, obviously this translates into everyday life and experiences, doesn't it? Not just in homeschooling. So so that's going to be different amongst every child, presumably. So are there some common ones to look out for?
I think what you've got to try and do is think about what your baseline is. If we talk to you about what your baseline is, think about what your baseline is, and then look to your children and think about what their baseline behaviour is. So a child might be happy all day, every day, and then all of a sudden they become very withdrawn, or they become very tearful, or they become a bit stampy feet, and you know, you just know that that's not your normal child. That's where this is happening. Yeah. So by being attuned to a child's behaviour, you become more aware of those clues as to what possibly could be going on. So you're using that sort of information to figure out and come up with a plan of how you're actually going to address things for them. So yes, you can do it in learning, and you can do it in social emotional stuff. You can do it in interactions. It's all about the brain physiology and understanding how the brain responds in times of threat. And threat is, right now we've got the threat of the pandemic. We all of us feel as though we've maybe lost a bit of self-control because we can't go out like we used to. We maybe don't feel quite as safe as we used to. Yeah. So it's about working out what our basic human needs are and trying to think about how to manage those. Children can't do that as effectively because they need us as the adults to help them learn how to do it.
So yeah, presumably they don't have the experiences to call upon yet, like we would. So okay, fascinating. The reality of this situation is that most parents, with homeschooling in particular, the children not being at school, most parents are going to be spending far more time with the children than they would have done. Yep. And perhaps that affords us the opportunity to understand as you mentioned there, the baseline behavior of our children. Now, we have this far greater allotted time to spend together, and that includes the time when we would have been together anyway, but perhaps that time we had distractions. So as parents, we would have been on our phones. We might have had to have done some work outside of the office back at home that again is a distraction from seeing how our children behave. But all in all, there's far more time spent together, far more time to witness the emotions that our kids are going to go through. But then as you rightly point out, tensions are high. So people are extremely threatened. The uncertainty has kind of fueled the fear and the anxiety to a level where presumably that emotional brain can be flipping the lid of the thinking brain a lot quicker. Yeah. So a shorter fuse. Okay. Really interesting. So we're looking out for these signs that they're moving away from their baseline behavior. It's becoming emotionally driven, and at which point they are not going to absorb the information that we are trying to teach them. That's right. Yeah. So you step away from it. Do you mean just change the environment, change the activity altogether, move away from that setting, or? I think it depends on what's actually happening. For me, it's okay to actually say, as a parent, do you know what, Sunshine, I just need 5 minutes away right now to actually get my thoughts into what I want to do. Yeah. So I'm just going to leave the room for 5 minutes, and then I'll come back in and we'll talk through this. I think it's children need to know that, and I think adults need to know that it's okay as well. So you could do that. Humor is an amazing distractor. Yeah. Recognizing that actually, do you know what, this task is a little bit difficult or challenging right now. How's about we stick it to one side, and why don't we just go and do something completely different, and we'll come back to it when we're both ready. I think we need to have a structure in terms of homeschooling. We need to have that routine because children need that routine, and we need that routine so that we have that meaning as well. But be flexible. Look at your child. Your child. You know what their strengths are. You know what their challenges are. Work out what their baseline behaviours are, and then work on how you actually help them almost process these new feelings, these new situations, because again, we are the adults. We need to help them understand that, yeah, it's a bit scary out there, but let's put it into context and think about, the age at which the child is. A 5-year-old is going to have very different thought processes to a 15-year-old. A 5-year-old
will be quite happy when mum and dad said, no, you can't go out. Whereas the 15-year-old will be saying, no, I want to go out. Why, you know, and you've then got to start thinking about the language and the processing of the information to that 15-year-old in a very different way that you would to a 5-year-old.
Yeah, you're again, absolutely right. Selfishly, I will give you the example of my two wonderful girls. One is 8, the other is 5, and it's fair to say that their current interpretation of the situation is completely different. So my 5-year-old, as you mentioned, she'll reference COVID-19 because obviously it's very difficult to not necessarily shield them from the conversation. There's obviously parts of this whole viral impact that we don't want them to be aware of, and we don't want to raise their stress levels so much by consistently talking about it in front of them. But you can't keep them away from picking up on things. So so my 5-year-old references it. She will quite often, when we step across the other side of the road to avoid close contact with other people, she has admittedly said to my wife on occasions, those people have a mask on, so they've got the virus. But my eldest daughter, coming up to 8, she's processing it completely differently. So she's looking at it with far more frustration, I would describe, and even saying to us a couple of days ago, as she was going to bed, she called up my wife, and she said to my wife, I feel really emotional. I don't know why. And what she referenced it as was because she was spending too much time with her sister. Now, again, in the setting of things, this is the longest period of time that the two of them have almost, been forced to spend most minutes of most days together. Yeah. And she said, I feel like I would benefit from just being with you, Mummy, for a day. Could Daddy stay with my sister? And could we try that? So I guess that's what you see, observing the baseline behavior and seeing the difference in the ages.
Yeah, and for your 8-year-old, that's really, really interesting that she's starting to actually tune in to. She probably wouldn't be able to name what her basic needs are, and she's clearly not able to name the emotions that she's feeling, but she's moving from that almost magical thinking and parent-led and school-led learning into what's going on here. And she's voiced to you that what she needs is one of her basic human needs to be met, one of which would be positive attention from one of her parents on her own, because she's having to share that attention. So she might be after some sort of privacy from her sister. She might be unhappy that she's lost her friendships that she has at school. And, it's about learning what those basic human needs are, and then helping her recognize, yes, we can meet that need. Yes, Daddy will look after your little sister for tomorrow. Yes, you and I will sit and do something. Yes, we'll do our hair. Yes, I tell you what, let's learn how to put nail varnish on. All of those little things that actually then help your 8-year-old get that basic need met. If you hadn't, for example, spent time with the younger one, the older one may have responded in a very different way. You might have found, that typical sort of sibling rivalry. Get out of my life, I don't want anything to do with you. Pushing them away, that type of thing.
So the very fact that, whether it's at that age, at 8 or perhaps a bit older, but the very fact that they're voicing that emotion, you're far better to acknowledge it and act on it than suppress it.
Yes, because what you want people to, or children, young people to do in the same way as adults, is to be able to express what it is that they are feeling. There isn't a curriculum for teaching feelings, but there is a curriculum for teaching maths. There is a curriculum for teaching English. So it's down to us to actually help children, young people actually understand that what they are feeling is normal. Do you know what I mean? So this normalisation of fear is okay. The normalisation of distress is okay. The normalisation of joy is okay. Normalisation of anger, it's all okay. We all experience those emotions at some point. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah, I do. And it's interesting, isn't it? Because you're essentially the situation that we're in. So this is completely uncharted for you and your profession, and potentially the emotions that children are then going to go through and hopefully express. But likewise, for an adult, the emotions that we're going through, which again are I would describe as being far more in abundance than ever before. Like you said at the start, the fear, the anxiety. And so essentially, if we're feeling that, it's fair to say the children are going to be feeling that.
Yeah. One of my favourite theorists and practitioners is a guy called Bruce Perry, absolutely amazing person, and he talks about emotional contagion. So if an adult is calm, the child will be calm. If the child is dysregulated and the adult is calm, the child will become calm. If the adult is dysregulated and the child is dysregulated, you are not going to get anything. That child will not become regulated. So it's really, really important to actually understand that your functioning, your emotions are actually picked up by children as well. So if you're anxious, they will pick up anxiety. If you're fearful, they will pick up fearful. If you're confident, they will pick up confidence. If you're saying, yes, this is a horrible thing that's actually going on, people are out there who are trying to help us and protect us, you're passing on that thought process to your children.
Brilliant. The whole idea, I use it in my practice as a physio, obviously this belief that children mimic. And as much as I might have read about this when I was in my studies, it's certainly been pushed to the forefront of my attention in having my own children. You observe this, you can physically see it happening in the way that my wife and I behave, and then suddenly the mannerisms, the behavior that you witness in your children. So the idea therefore that, again, in this scenario where we're all in a bit of a pressure cooker situation, if our emotions are being really challenged and pushed to the forefront, and we're feeling anxious and fearful, managing our emotions is crucial. So acknowledging our emotions, figuring out what de-stresses us, what down-regulates our brain, takes us away from fight or flight, is important, because unless we're dealing with it, there's no way we're going to be able to help our children deal with it.
Absolutely no way whatsoever. Yeah.
And
one of the biggest things for actually helping manage stress, and don't forget, stress is good for us. It's prolonged stress that is the challenge. It's prolonged stress that can lead to the longer term damage that you want. Yeah. The best way of actually dealing with things is to help work out what regulates your child. So if that is, they sit on the floor and you twiddle with their hair, and that regulates them, perfectly fine. If it's they sit next to you and you sat stroking their arm, that's fine. That's touch. Touch is massive in releasing those happy hormones.
Yeah.
If it's
so just to explain, so your reference of regulate, you mean calming them down potentially?
Calming them down. Yeah. Saying to somebody calm down doesn't actually work. Yeah. Saying to somebody, you look as though you need some help to come back down. I talk about coming down off cloud cuckoo land. Yeah. Having a walk with somebody, and I know we can't necessarily just go out like we used to, but walking side by side is great. If you've got a little trampoline, trampette, that sort of regulating movement is really good.
So the actual just getting them to bounce up and down.
Just up and down. It's recognizing that regular when they go back to being kids, when they were rocked. Anything.
That's really interesting. Okay,
Yeah.
so if you could get your child to physically move in a way that takes them up and down, almost similar to when they're in the womb,
Yes,
right?
a swing. You go on a swing. You know, as an adult, I don't mind saying this, as an adult, there's been a couple of occasions I have had some very, very stressful moments, and I've gone back to the childhood swings where I used to live, and I would sit on the swing for hours upon hours, literally just swinging. There was nothing wrong with that. That was my regulation method, as it were. Walking side by side is great because it's not a threat. So if you sat like that directly in front of somebody, that is really, really threatening. But side by side, you can have those conversations where you don't actually have to look at somebody in the eye. Touch is massive, Rob. It's absolutely massive.
It is. I mean, just to, you know, well, the very fact again that we're in a situation where, other than those within your household, you can't have, ideally you don't have physical contact with.
Nope.
They are missing this, right? The kids are missing the contact with their friends from being in that school environment, the camaraderie of it all, the banter of being amongst their mates. And you know, I certainly wouldn't say that I have acknowledged the importance of increasing the amount of hugging, cuddling, side by side, you know, giving them that feeling of support to help them come away from fight or flight, to reduce their emotional brain. So would I be right then in thinking that if we were structuring some kind of homeschooling method, given that, you know, certainly my wife and I don't have the skill as a teacher, but from what you're saying, that would be irrelevant anyway.
I don't think it matters. Honestly, I don't. I think, you know, learning can happen anywhere with any activity. You know, you could be doing a cooking activity. You could be making crispy cakes. You are learning about measuring. You're learning about how to melt chocolate. You're learning that, you know, if you accidentally get water in the pan whilst you're melting the chocolate, that the chocolate goes all sticky and it won't actually do anything. There are so many things that we can do to help children learn that do not have to be formal learning activities.
Yeah. I mean, I've got to be honest with you, Judith, the first thing that comes to my mind is we should perhaps lobby government to consider this when parents want to take their children out of school, to take them on a holiday of learning. You can't comment on that.
I can't comment on that one. No, I can't comment on that one. But I do kind of hope, though, that in the future that the whole curriculum is considered, because for me we are missing out on so many opportunities to learn. Like I say, you know, forest schools. Wow, what can you do in a forest school that you can't do in a formal classroom? What could you do in, you know, you can go to the park and you can learn in the park. You can learn about the physics of how the swings work. You can learn about social interactions. You can sit and you can watch people. There's so many opportunities out there that, you know, we can just use.
And I guess in that respect, there's no reason why at the moment taking up that daily exercise that you couldn't not learn, if that makes sense. So you could go on your daily exercise, you could people watch, you could observe behavior, you could talk to your children about it, you know, still highlighting the positives of the situation rather than being constantly consumed with the negatives.
Take a book of how to identify British trees, for example. Take the pictures and go to the park and see if you can find, you know, the oak, see if you can find the sycamore. Can you find the four-leaf clover? Can we find some bugs? All of those things, massive learning opportunities. And you can sit with your kids on the grass and you can talk about managing emotions whilst you're doing something that isn't a threat. You can talk about ideas whilst doing something that isn't a threat.
I would suggest it's going to be learning for the parents as well. And this time, this opportunity of time in the pandemic of getting back into nature. You know, we've all been so distracted so recently as well. It's not as if this hasn't come about in the last 20 odd years, I would suggest, digitally, that all of a sudden we spend the majority of our time in front of a screen, whereas this situation is a bit of that. Obviously, we're doing this on a screen, kids learning on the screen at home. But if you get that opportunity to come away from that and to go outside, what a great idea, go and absorb yourself with nature again, which is even more in abundance now because traffic's quieter, noise pollution's less. There's far more bird song in the morning. It's fantastic in that respect.
Yeah. Get up at 4:30, watch the sunrise. Take them out and watch the sunset. All of the things that, maybe they couldn't do because we've got to get up early for school. And you'll be tired if we're out at 9 o'clock when the sun is setting. So many things, Rob, honestly.
And in doing that, in creating joyful experiences, happy experience, you mentioned earlier about humour, the importance of humour, and laughter in particular. And I read a while back that there's research now to suggest that when we laugh, when we are physically going through that emotion of laughter, it's the only time that the fight or flight can't function. It switches it off. Totally. So finding humor and perhaps when we identify they've moved away from their baseline behavior, again going back to the teaching scenario at home, you're starting to notice these other emotions surface. So break them away from the environment, perhaps introduce humor, perhaps give them some more contact side by side, talk them through it, explain to them that it's okay to have this emotion. It's what mummy and daddy would experience as well. Yeah. And then at any given point, go back to it, but in a far more welcoming manner. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, even things like drawing. Children can often draw what it is that they are feeling, and you can get some clues from that. A parent could, for example, almost like set up a little worry box in the house somewhere where they actually draw what it is that's on their mind, or they write what is in their mind. And you have a set time at some point during the day where we'll pick out a worry out of the worry box and we'll have a chat around it.
So this would be an open box.
Could be an open box, yeah.
With emotions written down on paper, folded up and placed in, or
it could be, for example, instead of saying to your wife that your eldest daughter was wanted some of her time, she could write that down, or she could put it in a picture and put it in the box.
Right.
Then that particular worry is voiced, and it's not owned by that person saying it verbally. It's just something that's in there. So we don't say, "Oh right, well it was the 8-year-old that said that or drew that," but this is in the box. How do you think we could deal with that one?
And that's obviously similar to an adult journaling. Writing down your emotions.
Yeah. Think about the tone of voice that you use as well. Think about your non-verbal your non-verbal signals that you're giving out. All of those things children will pick up on as well. So
the body language. This is the mimicry again, isn't it?
Gosh, they're on the phone whilst the child is trying to actually explain something. Doesn't give the child the feeling that they are being listened to, that they are not getting the attention that they need right there at that particular point. And then sometimes what will happen is the attention-seeking behaviour might increase. Yeah, do you know what I mean? So that they become almost like poking mummy, poking daddy. Yeah, and then you might whip around and say, "Will you get off?" But actually, what they needed at that particular point was you to be there, to be present, to help them deal with that situation at that particular point. And that's about us as adults becoming attuned to our behaviours just as much as the child's behaviour.
Yeah, I think that's a very poignant point there. You're actually saying the situation where most, if not all, parents are going to be right now, where they're kind of juggling between remaining connected with potentially work, friends, family, digitally, whether that's through a phone screen, like we said before, at the same time having in the presence of their children these emotions that are building and building and building. The importance of digital detoxing, coming away from it, and first and foremost acknowledging what your child is after, and the difference that filtering that down to our children now. Here's a question for you. What about at the end of all of this, when the lockdown has been removed, when kids are returning to school, what about how do we, whether you can explain this, how we deal with their emotions, but what should we expect? I mean, presumably you take a child out of an environment that they've been used to for so long as a routine. They've been removed from socializing with their friends, and as I said about the ages of my two, both of them have expressed feelings of missing their friends. What should we expect as parents of reintroducing them into that setting? Should we be aware of certain emotions?
I think one of the hard things about psychology is we don't have crystal balls. And we don't know when lockdown is going to end. We don't know when the schools are going to go back. We don't know how the schools are going to go back, and we don't know how the curriculum is going to be taught. So again, we've got that unknown factor. I would be saying that at the point that we are being told that it's safe for the lockdown to be removed, that's when we can start having some of the conversations about maybe, you know, the exciting aspect of going back and seeing your friends. I think what the policymakers need to be thinking about is how are they going to introduce learning again. For me, I would be very worried if they go straight back into the classroom and they're expected to respond in the way that they did prior to lockdown. So
you would have concerns if the school or if the government, you know, were kind of professing that people go back into it as if nothing had happened.
Yes.
So that could be detrimental to their learning, you'd think?
I think if you think about your two children, they've been off school at least 6 weeks. How do you prepare them for going back to school after a 6-week break? So think about the 6 weeks school summer holiday. Yeah. How do you get back ready to going into school? Now think about the fact that we've gone through a 6-week lockdown because of a pandemic where we've not been safe to leave the house. It wouldn't surprise me if there would be some children who, you know, perhaps say, I don't want to go back. So then how do we actually deal with that? And again, it's about understanding where they are coming from and helping rationalize their fears or rationalize their anxieties, and then helping them almost rewrite the templates of their anxieties so that they recognize, actually, do you know what, we've done this, we've come out of this and we have succeeded. But there will be some children, for example, where the anxieties are too great for them to go back.
Almost, they're like very, I mean, this is really interesting. So like a first day at school scenario where some kids can float into school, no worries in the world, are excited about that opportunity. Other kids, you know, kicking and screaming, they don't want to go. So basically, I guess, you're absolutely right. We need to be prepared that that's a possibility, an actual possibility.
Mm-hmm. I would be worried as well if there was an expectation that children and young people go back into that, you know, into the classroom setting where they're sat at their desks and they're having to listen to the teacher and do the work, where they've had some time where, you know, I just fancy getting up and go to the toilet, or I just fancy getting up and going for a drink. There's going to be a period of readjustment for everybody, for teachers, for parents, for children, young people. I think we have to look at, again, for those changes in baseline behaviour. So if you're
Right. Yeah.
they're really happy, that's probably fine. If your child is going back and is showing signs of tearfulness or anxiety, it's unpicking what is it that is causing that fear or that anxiety. And I keep talking about fear and anxiety because they're for me are the key things that we have to deal with and work with. But you can learn to manage fear. You can learn to manage anxiety. It's where it gets dysfunctional is where we inadvertently as adults reinforce the child's anxiety as well. So yes, you're absolutely right. School is an anxious place. Do you know what I mean? So sometimes you've got to take the parent role and say, it's okay, you can do this, and then reinforce that they did that. So that it's a bit like writing a Word document. Every time you write a Word document, the final thing is not the same as it was the first time. So you can overwrite that template. Yeah. So we may have some children, young people who feel that they can't do that. We may have some children who just say to themselves, no, it was fine. We didn't have to go into school right now. I'm not going to do it. We're going to have to learn how to actually work with those children. And for me, it's about helping them see their meaning in life. And I would imagine that the children who don't want to go back to school are the ones who have perhaps failed in school, or the ones who didn't like school in the first place. It was okay during pandemic for me to not go to school. So why do I have to go now? They will be challenges that we will have to deal with in the future.
Yeah, wow. It's really interesting, isn't it? And no doubt what I'm hearing as well is that you should probably expect to be extremely busy.
I think our work will be very different when we go back. Very different. I want to be able to help teaching staff, teaching assistants to actually understand the types of things that we've just been talking about, so that they're more prepared. They can actually understand this. This has been a trauma. I wouldn't say it's not a trauma in the scale of war trauma, yeah, but it has been a trauma. We need to have trauma-informed processes, and if staff don't necessarily have that, that's where I see some of the work of the educational psychology team having an impact.
Yeah, I've previously I've read up on, as you mentioned there, trauma. And you again absolutely right to describe this whole situation as trauma, emotional trauma that we're all experiencing. And there's obviously some really interesting therapy methods available to everyone as a resource on the internet, in how we can use forms of physical exercise in particular to release emotional trauma. I wonder if anything like that could be incorporated, whether it's into the curriculum or whether it's as an extra, as an add-on. But maybe even the starting point, as you say, is just to acknowledge that there's the possibility it would have to.
Yeah. The best way of moving on from trauma is relationships, Rob. If you've got healthy relationships, you can move things on. If you go back into a setting where you don't get on with the maths teacher, or you don't get on with physics teacher, whatever it is, that's happening. Yeah, so you're not going to be ready to learn, and we need people to understand that those doses of, the happy smile, or what did you do at the weekend, those types of conversations, they are all the types of things that help move things on.
The whole sense of community that suddenly that's been taken away from us, tactile certainly in that respect, but given that we can't move within 2 meters of each other, there is a greater sense of community now. People are also looking out for each other more, and filtering that down to our children, therefore, and making them aware that even given these circumstances, it's it's very, very important that we appreciate what we had before, and when we're allowed to do that again, we take advantage of it.
Yeah, and just as an example as to how quickly we almost become conditioned to the 2 metre rule. Watching a TV programme the other night, and I sat and talked to my son and said, they're not socially distancing. Do you know what I mean? It's only been 3 weeks, yet my brain's already saying they weren't socially distancing. And what I'll have to do is to reprogram that thought process when I'm back outside.
Yeah, and obviously children adapt a lot quicker than adults, don't they? So let's just hope that when they do return, it's another quick adaptation to the scenario, so that there's less impact to their learning first and foremost. Yeah,
time, and you'll get it further on down the line.
Yeah,
you'll get
fascinating.
Much more regulated children.
That is extremely informative. I'm so glad we've managed to catch up with you and pick your brains. And as I said at the start, even more so reassuring, given that your qualifications and your background, parent first and foremost, teacher, educational psychologist, and admitting that you would struggle in this situation. Absolutely. And it's okay to.
Absolutely. It is totally okay to. Yeah.
Well, I'm going to go away and write out this petition about removing children from school for holidays. I'm joking. I'm not going to. I would love to be able to chat to you again at some point, Judith. If that's okay with you. We'll see what comments, if any, that people might have. They might have questions themselves. They might like to fire your way. I'm sure we can try and structure something like that in the future.
That's fine. Happy to do that.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Take care of yourself, and we'll be in touch soon. Cheers, Judith.
All right then. Thanks,
Bye.
Rob. See ya.